Is New World not so new anymore? Or maybe you finally escaped the clutches of World of Warcraft and you aren't really vibing with the aesthetics of Final Fantasy XIV. Or maybe you're just waiting for 14 to release more content. Either way, let me introduce you to Guild Wars 2, a game where the devs don't actively try to make their players hate them, and they don't use FOMO tactics or gear treadmills. Instead, they focus more on evergreen content. Anyways, let's get into what you came here for. Let's go ahead and address the elephant in the room before anything else. Guild Wars 2 has this reputation for being dead, dying, or in maintenance mode, and this isn't really true at all. In fact, the only kernel of truth in Guild Wars 2's fall from popularity stems from an event that was taken really out of context from those outside of the community or those looking from afar. The first was when ArenaNet was hit with a bunch of layoffs, and around the same time the devs disclosed that they were working on a side project that drained resources from the main game. This project of course fell through, and because of that, a perfect storm of bad press developed, and most people didn't stick around and see what really happened. They just assumed the worst. Second, ANET decided to break their cadence of expansion pack release cycle, and this kind of reinforced the above point. I will say the decision to break that cadence did lead to a massive and very prolonged content drought. There are other small factors as well that has caused Guild Wars to seem a little less than the most active MMO, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. However, even with all of the content drought and bad press, the game is still quite active and still has an estimated 500,000 players active in the game. This, if anything, is a testament of how nearly unkillable the game is, and this is to do with how Guild Wars 2 does things differently than the other big MMOs. So first off is combat. It's considered a hybrid between action combat and tab targeting. Most games stick to being just one or the other, but not Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 wants to be special, and the results are kind of weird, but not wholly bad. In fact, it's quite good once you get used to it. The game achieves this hybrid system in two ways. Most attacks and other actions have some sort of cleave or splash to them, with few but impactful exceptions. The other way is that every attack has a physical component to them, meaning that spells and other long-range abilities can be either body blocked or simply dodged. Likewise, melee attacks only count if the weapon connects with the hitbox. I know this is rather basic, but this in practice means that there are no abilities that automatically hits an enemy or that need some sort of random number generator to determine whether or not it hits or misses. This system allows you to be as casual as you want, or it lets you go as hardcore as you want. However, the combat in this game is not without its blemishes, namely how floaty the combat can feel at times, and this is actually a very common complaint. Another more annoying issue is how obtuse the game can feel at times, since you'll often find yourself trying to read tooltips in the middle of a bullet hell encounter to just figure out how they expect you to deal with said encounter. Anyways, enough about me complaining. Let's move on to the next topic, which is also one of my favorite parts of the game, and that's the classes and the theory crafting around them. The class system in Guild Wars 2 is, to its credit, so incredibly intricate that I cannot hope to do it justice without doing an entire video dedicated to just that topic. So the overly simplified version cuts it down to 3 overall aspects, but with a twist at the end. The first, your choice of weapons and skill, your choice of stats, and your choice of specializations. The weapons and skills are self-explanatory. The stat choice is just the overall flavor of stat combos for your weapons and armor, and there are a lot of them. And finally, the specializations. The best way to describe them is that they're like the talent trees from World of Warcraft, but if they also had sub-trees. Oh, and you can have 3 of those same trees at the same time, and there's more than 3 of them to choose from, so you can mix and match the different specializations. Now, The twist is what's called the elite specializations, which is quite reminiscent of how multi-classing works in 5th edition D&D. You lose core elements from your main class and gain different characteristics from other classes or other mechanics that would be seen in other classes. A good example is the Necromancer, which yes, there's necromancy. They go from using death magic as a defensive cloak, which is called the Death Shroud, to just straight up being a Nazgul with a giant greatsword that just swings a big scythe around whenever they go into their Death Shroud, going from a hyper defensive build to a very offensive one. And there's going to be a total of 27 of these. They all feel very distinct, to be honest. So yeah, there's a lot of choices for the different playstyles, which brings me nicely to the horizontal progression system in this game, which centers around choice of play, or the choice of playstyle. Guild Wars 2 starts after level 80. This isn't some sort of euphemism or cheesy cliche statement to impress upon you of how amazing the endgame is. No, I mean this in the quite literal fashion. Everything before 80 can be seen as a bad tutorial with a good story. But after level 80, the game branches out into several different types of in-game content that you're going to be basically doing for the rest of your play duration for the game. Some of them are meta event trains, world boss trains, achievement hunting, playing the market as always, fractals, which are like mythic dungeons, and raiding, and you can't forget about fashion frame. Though I will say, the fractals and raids are pretty much dead. Now, just to explain, meta events are where a map has a chain of several different sub-dynamic events that build up into a big end event that pretty much acts as a map-wide raid. This is quite honestly some of the most fun content you'll ever find in Guild Wars 2, and that's what a lot of people praise the game for. However, one of the biggest problems with this type of content layout is the fact that it can feel very disconnected from one another. This is, however, a very common systemic problem with horizontal progression in general. All these systems do, however, come back and intertwine with one another whenever you get into legendary crafting, but you have to know the systems very well. You have to know the systems in and out quite well before you really see how they're connected. And lastly, the biggest problem that this type of content system really has is its effect on the community, which is the best segue into my next topic for this, the community. I don't want to come off as being overly critical of the Guild Wars 2 community with this because, well, that's not my intent, because the community can be very positive at times. However, there are certain aspects of it that I feel like should be critiqued, if nothing else, and that's really the unhealthy level of casual contempt that players have for one another, especially those that have no overlap in different content, as well as a really unhealthy, in fact toxic levels of productivity in the community, which has led to basically toxic levels of gatekeeping. This has basically killed all fractals and raiding almost entirely. There's a lot of people that want to get into it, but no one really wants to deal with that side of the community. The saddest part about all of this is that the only time I've ever seen the community ever come together wholeheartedly is to defend themselves against anybody that tries to claim that the community is toxic. And right after that, they go back stonewalling each other about all the different problems each system can possibly have, without ever really considering that they can go for years without experiencing the same problems or the same delights as other players can, because they never branch out and try new systems or new content within the game itself, which is a product of the horizontal progression system in of itself, which has also further the stigma that Guild Wars 2 is dying or doesn't really have much of content. It isn't because it doesn't have content, it's because a lot of the people just get into a rut and never try new things. Lastly, I want to touch on the PvP side of the game, of what little there is. So the best way to describe PvP in this game is really split between structured and massive PvP. The structure pretty much plays as a King of the Hill style that just kind of rotates around between 3 points. The massive PvP works a lot like New World, but as if it had years and years to develop, and plays out very nice. In fact, give 5 years to New World and it's going to look like Guild Wars 2. That's the best way that I can put it. So let's wrap this thing up. So to summarize, Guild Wars 2 is very much alive, and despite what many people in other games might say, you're still going to have quite a bit of fun if you decide to pick it up. And this is of course before End of Dragon comes out, which I am going to be doing a full review and analysis of the expansion whenever it does. I might even be streaming it, I don't know yet. But yeah, that pretty much sums up what I have to say about Guild Wars 2. At least for now. Anyways, I hope you found this video enjoyable and informative, and I will see you in the next video.